Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts about the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are changing the way we live. My name is jan-willem, and I will be your host again today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. You can always watch back the recording of this discussion on YouTube, the Big Data Framework website, as well as the podcasting platforms from Apple and Spotify. Today, I have the great pleasure to welcome Andy Cotgreave. Andy is a seasoned data expert and senior data evangelist at Tableau, a Salesforce company. With over 17 years of experience in the industry, he has established himself as a prominent figure, co-authoring the Big Book of Dashboards and earning a spot in the 2022 dataIQ Top 100 Most Influential People in Data. As a thought leader, Andy co-hosts Chart Chat, a monthly video series delving into the intricacies of data communication. He's also the driving force behind the Sweet Spot newsletter, offering curated stories that showcase the fascinating intersection of data with the world. Andy's passion for advancing data cultures is evident through his extensive contributions. He helps clients, media, and analysts from various industries gain valuable insights and understanding around their data. In addition, Andy is the host of Data Could Talk and Chart Chat, both video series dedicated to exploring the realms of data culture and visualization. Andy, it's an absolute pleasure to have you today. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so welcome to Big Data Talks.
Well, it's great to be here, jan-willem, and hello to everybody. And yeah, that guy sounds quite interesting that you've just described. So I'll try and fill the expectations accordingly.
Well, I'm quite sure you're going to do that, and it's always good to have somebody with such an amount of expertise on this platform. So I'm very, very pleased. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite a while now. So I'd like to kick off and kind of get a bit of your story. So how did you end up where you are today? How has your journey evolved over the past 18 years?
So I'll try. I'm actually going to give you a full career history here, but I'm going to try and do it in about 90 seconds. My job at Tableau, my job at Tableau is Tableau Evangelist. I am paid to create content that inspires, educates, and entertains through written content, keynoting, books, videos, etc. So in order to do that job, you need to be a data expert in data, a communicator, a speaker, a writer, a thinker, and have empathy with other people. And it turns out my whole career kind of led to this without me really realizing it. I left school wanting to be an artist, but then spent the summer in the Arctic looking at glaciers, so did a geography degree instead. Then followed that up with a computer science master's. My first job was a software engineer, writing software for elementary schools, doing loads of usability testing as well. Mm-hmm. Then moved to database administration and really sort of back-end data work, much more hardcore coding. Got laid off, so spent a year bumming around New Zealand, riding a bike and working in hotels and writing articles for mountain bike magazines. Then became a business researcher, speaking to CEOs of small companies. At that company, I also managed all their data and started printing single-page Excel charts for a boss to try and get him off my back. He kept asking questions. So I was like, I'm just going to print you out a summary page. Here's all the charts. Just go away. And a year later, I discovered that those were called dashboards. I was like, oh, that's quite interesting. That led me to a data analyst job at the University of Oxford in 2007, where I downloaded Tableau. And then in 2011, I joined Tableau, right, and became evangelist in 2016. So there you go. Right. Why have I just gone through that entire history? Artist. I learned how to draw and be creative. Geographer, empathy, liberal study skills, critical thinking. And then software development, journalism, writing, curiosity, and speaking. All ended up with this job. So accidentally, I had a portfolio career that gave me the skills I needed for this job. Whew.
Yeah, it's very funny that you actually mentioned that, because I personally I studied journalism, which also has completely nothing to do with data. So it's very, very similar. And over this series, I've talked to quite a number of people who started more into the liberal arts, in your case, geography. But it turns out that those skills equip them very, very well for the world of data. Do you share that?
Absolutely. You know, as you speak to people in these careers right across the board, the amount of people who went, I left school and wanted to be a data analyst. You're like, I mean, they exist, but I very, very rarely, I can't actually think of ever having met somebody. Now, there are really good data analytics courses at university. So if that is a career goal, then go for it. But most people are sort of accidental analysts. But yeah, those skill sets, you have to have this ability to empathize, to listen, to digest other people's things, and then communicate information back. It's sometimes annoyingly you see it described as a soft skill, but I think that completely underplays the importance. It's a fundamental, rock hard skill you need in this career. So, yeah.
Well, I like the way that you're describing accidental analyst. I think I'm going to borrow that term from you.
Yeah, to be fair, I borrowed that. There was a book, an old Tableau employee, Stephen McDaniels, wrote a book in 2011 called The Accidental Analyst, and it's a good phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, we talked about this. This show is all about looking at the world in which, how the world is basically changing due to all of the cool new technologies that we can do with data. What's your take on it? Where are we today, and where's the world going in the next few years?
Well, you can't go very far. Yeah, you can't go very far in 2024 without AI. Oh, it's all AI, right? So that seems to be where we're going. But I'm going to ask you a question, Jan-Willem. Right, I'm gonna say something. Right, I'm gonna say a quote, and I want you to tell me what year the quote is from. Okay, right. So here we go. Millions of dollars are spent every year on the collection of data, with the assumption that possessing the data corrects the problems being studied. So, right. So 100. Yeah. What year do you think?
I'm gonna take a guess, but I'm assuming it's much older than we all think. So I'm gonna say 1970s, somewhere in
right.
that area.
1970s. Brilliant. So millions of dollars being wasted. You have gone old. Guess what? It's from this book, right? This book, Graphic Methods for Presenting Facts, was printed 110 years ago. It's 1914. On page 1, he's like, oh my God, we're collecting data and we don't know how to use it. And so he talks about data visualization, creating an analytics culture, and how to make use of data, right? And this was the start of big data. In here, you've got the Hollerith tabulating machines that can process 3,000 records per hour. Right. So,
cool.
110 years ago, we had too much data and we didn't have the data cultures or the data processes in place to actually fix the problems. AI ain't going to fix that in any way more than the problems we had 110 years ago. So we are possibly at the cusp of a really exciting revolution in AI. There's certainly some amazing things it's enabling us to do. But without good data, you aren't going to get anywhere with AI, right? So
So you mentioned something very interesting, which is data culture.
Mm-hmm.
What's your definition or concept around that?
Well, a data culture is a sort of a sense, a movement within an organization where people can access useful data, they can interpret and find the insights they need out of useful data, and importantly, have conversations about that data, right? Having the data skills to know that just because we're looking at average podcast listens going up every single month, we can still question whether it's the right average, or we can then explore more causes. To get that data culture being successful, you need policies to build good data models, you need policies to create secure access, but you need to invest in a huge amount of data literacy so that people either can access and play with the data correctly, or even just learn how to interpret data. Because, my God, we still see so many bad conclusions, terrible visualizations, appalling charts on slides that aren't really helping anybody with that data.
Anyone, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned data literacy, and that's a term that has been coming up in this series. Well,
Hmm.
I would say almost in every episode. Um, Data culture and data literacy is one a prerequisite of the other, or how should we look at that relation?
I guess I could say data literacy is a subset within a good data culture. I mean, you could invest
Okay.
in data literacy skills without investing in the data culture. I mean, what investing in data literacy skills would kind of push people towards building a data culture. So I think they can be seen as separately. So data literacy is, I mean, even that's a slightly hard, slight umbrella
Yeah,
term
it's
because
very difficult, and that's exactly why I'm asking.
yeah, because as a data analyst, my data literacy skills require me to understand database technology, the analytics tools, and then how to craft and create a visualization that other people can understand. Somebody, say a colleague in marketing whose job it is to run campaigns, doesn't necessarily need to know anything about the science of data analysis, but they need to be able to interpret and critique visualizations from other people. So there are different types of data literacy skills within an
Yeah.
organization too.
Yeah, and the reason I'm trying to dissect that a little bit is because you see that those kind of container terms are being thrown around a lot these days.
Yep.
Whereas it's very difficult for organizations or people who are listening today to kind of then grasp what is it, how can I make it happen, and what I'm always trying to do in this series is trying to dive a little bit deeper into um, not just the what, but also how is it then possible to actually get started with that. So if you were to give, let's say, one piece of advice to everyone listening, say, I'm interested in establishing a data culture, or I'd like to have everyone become more data literate in my organization, where would you start?
Uh, I would start. Well, one good place to start is to create a baseline across an organization. Where are you now?
Like
Right?
an assessment, or
Yeah, right. There are ways in which you can. I mean, there are plenty of these things online. There are sort of ways to baseline how data literate is your organization, and they are often framed in maturity scales. So on level 0, nobody's using data for anything. You've maybe got one person who knows how to use a pivot table, and then on the super mature scale, you end up with people using data for predictive, actionable decision making.
yeah.
So you can find yourself here. So find where you are, and also make sure you don't just ask the leaders and the managers, because the leaders and the managers have a far more optimistic view than the actual people at the front line.
Would it be?
And it's on. I mean, we have done some amazing research on that, and you're like, we've got a great data culture, and then you ask all the actual people who do the work, and you're like, we have a terrible data culture. So once you got that baseline, you can then adopt policies and strategies to move on. But I mean, it's a whole book, series, and course to go beyond all of those steps.
No,
But
that's a
that's
good
one
first step, and
starting
I
point.
think that it makes things tangible, and that's exactly why I was asking that. So from the book you were just holding, we're gonna go, let's say, 100 years fast forward,
Yeah.
and that's when you decided to work with another other few authors on another publication, which resulted in the big book of dashboards. And I think a lot of people have, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one. And I think a lot of people have read it and really like it. What was it that kind of drove you to say, now I'm going to share my knowledge with the world? There's a need for this specific publication.
So we found when we started writing the book, gosh, 2016. 2015 we started writing. That's nearly
It's
10 years
also a
ago.
decade ago almost.
Well. So the first thing to say is we are writing a new book. We've just started writing a second book about dashboards. So there will be another one in hopefully
Nice.
May, June 2025. Why did we write this one? 10 years ago, there were loads of books on how to build charts, how to do data visualization. And there was one book on how to build dashboards by Stephen Few. Now, all three of us, Steve, Jeff, and I, who wrote Big Book of Dashboards, took a huge amount of inspiration from that book. But Stephen Few's book was very much here are 1,000 terrible examples, don't do this. And also, it was also published 20 years ago, right? So it was a bit dated, and it kind of took a negative view of the world. So we realized there was no book in the field on, look, here are real world examples that are amazing, and here's how you can be inspired by them. We also, it turns out, the three of us also love building dashboards. We had a lot of experience doing it. So we recognized the gap. The gap filled our ambitions anyway, and turns out
the rest is history.
Turns out the rest is history. I mean, it's been an amazing success, which
absolutely. I think it's widely regarded as one of the leading publications in dashboarding. Today, even though it's already quite written some time ago. I think it kind of hit a really, really sweet spot within the dashboarding market.
Thank you.
I know that at Tableau you're involved with evangelizing, teaching, spreading word. Do you still kind of refer back to kind of that book a lot to showcase examples and illustrate what you're doing?
Yes. What's strange when there's a path of expertise. I forget what the model is, but when you hit the highest level of expertise, which I'm being humble, you get to the level of unconscious competence. Right?
Competence, yes.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of that scale. So now I personally don't have to refer back to a lot of things. They're just kind of in here, and when I'm building dashboards, the knowledge is just internalized now. So I did look at the book actually last week because I am building something, and I did steal an idea from that, but it's all in my head now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's where it should be, especially if you wrote it. Now, I'm obviously going to encourage everyone who's listening or watching this to buy the book. We'll put the link underneath this, obviously. But for those, we're in this fast-paced TikTok kind of culture these days. So for everyone who is wondering what are kind of like the key takeaways from your book, what would be a kind of the millennial or Gen Z version of the publication?
God, I'm 52 years old. I don't know. Let me try and describe my book to my teenage daughters. It's do I want to describe the book or what they can learn? Let's describe what they can learn. A dashboard should be as simple as it possibly can without being simplistic. It should have a defined goal and audience, and every single pixel on that dashboard should serve the goal, the audience, in as simple a way as possible.
Well, I think that's probably the best description of a dashboard I've heard in a while.
It's really hard, though. Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, one of the funniest things, one of the most interesting things, as I look back on the book, is how we define our definition of a dashboard. In the end, our definition is just 15 words long. It's a, I can't even remember it. I mean, it's a visual. I can't even remember what it is, right? Because our point being, in the end, we don't care what a definition of a dashboard is. We care about does it solve the goal of getting the information to the right people in the right vehicle? And Stephen Few, he wrote and told us that out of the 28 real examples in this, only 8 of them are actually dashboards. And we're like, we don't care. They're 28 real world scenarios of people monitoring data. If you want to call them trees or headphones, call them what you want, right? Anyway.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, I was at a conference, which is obviously, I go to a lot of data conferences, and I was in a very interesting talk about dashboards. And somebody said, well, within the world of people who absorb and look at dashboards, you basically have these two big categories. One is he referred to it as the functionalists, the people that are interested in what the information is saying. The other are interested in being the aesthetics people. Mm-hmm. And they, if there is even wrong use of colors or one of the X's is misplaced, basically that distracts them so much that the whole message is kind of lost on them. And they say, visually it needs to be perfect. And he basically argued that this is two completely different breeds of people. And I was wondering what your thoughts on that. Is that something you share, or yeah, I would love to get your take on that.
I don't think that's two different breeds of people at all. I mean, personally, I strive to make things that are aesthetically beautiful that serve the purpose of the business audience. Now, it's not easy. There's obviously more to say than that, right?
Yeah.
First of all, what is a dashboard? In Tableau, for example, Tableau says you create a dashboard, but then that dashboard could be a beautiful Iron Viz style storytelling infographic where, and it's still in Tableau, it's still called a dashboard. So a lot of people think dashboard is any kind of multi-display visual thing. Whereas I'm like, well, that some of those things are infographics or data stories or data narratives. They're slightly different, right? So for me, even though my dashboard definition is vague, when I'm talking about dashboards, I'm talking about things that monitor processes, right? And if a thing needs to monitor a process, then you need to spend a lot of time making something that is aesthetic, where the aesthetic beauty comes from simplicity. So I get very proud that the dashboards I build are really austere, but I think they're beautiful because they're stripped back as far as they possibly can be to convey the information. Sometimes I create the data stories and I go nuts and overload on color and do all the wacky stuff, but they're different purposes. I have the skills to design aesthetic and functional, so I don't think they're different breeds of people because I don't think I'm unique.
That's exactly why I wanted to get your take on that as well. Now, the next question might be quite hard. Is what is the most beautiful dashboard that you have ever seen in your life?
Oh, what?
You must get this question a lot.
You know what? I don't actually. The most beautiful dashboard. So, are you going to ask me in terms of business use, or you probably are?
No, so
the most beautiful visualization.
Personally, I don't mind if it's business related, or you say this is something that it checks all the boxes that I consider the perfect visualization, if any such thing even exists.
I mean, there's a million I could choose. I'm gonna go back to the one that's on my wall there. So if you're listening, you can't see it. I'm pointing my webcam at Charles Minard's 1869 chart showing the march to Moscow when Napoleon took 500,000 soldiers to Moscow, failed miserably, and returned with only 10,000. So that's a story that uses color, angle, annotations, slope, thickness to tell the story of the biggest military disaster of all time, and for many people it's a gateway into, including me, it's a gateway into data visualization, so I'll go with that as a masterpiece.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great example for those of you who are listening and would like to see it. We'll post a link to the picture underneath this recording so that you have a chance to click on it as well. Thanks for sharing.
It's a brilliant example as well, because people who've been in the field a long time start going, why are we always showing Minard? It's so boring, and is it the best way to visualize the data? And it's like, no, it's not the best way. It's a great way, right? And it really emphasizes the problem with being an expert in this field is you forget the experience of seeing something like that for the first time and going, oh my God, you can use color, angle, and things to tell this really rich data story, right? Ooh, that's mind-blowing. So never forget that it's mind-blowing the first time you see it.
So I would like to dive a little bit deeper into the complexity, because large organizations, there's a lot of complexity. I would even go as far as to say the larger the organization, the more complex it becomes. And it's very difficult to drill that down into, let's say, key metrics, key visualizations, key things that are worth reporting or are basically worth monitoring at all. When you must have gone through dozens of examples where basically you first enter and the management saying, I want to have this dashboard and I'd like to have that. How do you approach that complexity part of bringing it down? Because putting the data into a visualization, as if you know what you want to have, that's in my opinion, quite the simple part. But the difficult part is getting people to understand what is it that they actually need to look at. And I was wondering if you have a specific approach or a specific methodology with how you get into that kind of conversation with executives.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the hardest questions and things to solve. One thing
I never said that it was going to be an easy interview.
No, I know, and right. So where I've seen success is right from the start. You don't make an assumption that there is one dashboard that can solve all the problems. Right? I get something that happens internally in my company, and I've seen in many organizations, is that the executives or leaders get a summary dashboard for at their level of business, and they're like, "Brilliant! We've done business intelligence. I can track sales across the region. I can track leads across the world. Awesome. We've done BI." But then you go, see, I'm always fine for the people down here, right? But this person, what is the point of a aggregated summary dashboard? It's like that teaches me nothing, right? Because down at the lower level in an organization, you need a much more granular view of the data because you're taking much more tactical decisions. And so anytime I talk to people about a dashboard strategy, it's like, how are you solving the problem for people at different levels? Because the summary dashboard is useless for your, marketing people in marketing, or the people, an entry level account executive. And I think that's generally a really eye-opening exercise, because leaders are the people sponsoring. Very often, leaders are people sponsoring these initiatives, and they're like, I just want a summary dashboard. It's like, yeah, you do, but most of your organization doesn't. Oh, really? Yeah. So that's one way I've seen success.
Absolutely, and that brings us to, I think, one of the big issues with dashboards is there are, in most organizations, especially if they've been around for a long while, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of different dashboards, all talking different things.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was doing data projects, we also built all kinds of dashboards, and in the technology, I'm quite sure you can do this in Tableau as well. You could actually see who looked at it. So we saw that, some of the dashboards, and then we had these meetings, and all these executives came in, and I already had a look at who actually looked at the dashboard in let's say the last week before they even attend the meeting. And to my, I would say amazement, or to my disappointment, don't really know how I could call it. A lot of people enter meetings, they enter into the discussions in which important decisions need to be made, and they're blindly diving in while they haven't even looked at the dashboard. They have not even looked at the information that is going to be discussed in that specific meeting. And this is maybe bringing us back towards the data culture that you just mentioned. How do you deal with that, and how can you make sure that we, in this information driven world that we're in today, with this overload of dashboards that is typically there, how do we make sure that we focus people to the right tools, basically?
Right, that's a really good thing. I've got two answers to that. First of all, if leaders are investing in data initiatives and BI, ask them why, and ask them if they are committed to supporting the initiative. Because if it isn't actually genuinely supported from the top, it's not going to work. There's an example in our book from Mark Jackson. He used to be a Tableau Zen master, but he's a great Tableau user. And it was a dashboard that monitored the usage of Tableau in the organization. And in his organization, he had managed to get the leaders to commit to using the dashboards. So what he built was literally tracking how many times all the executives logged on each week, right? And he's like, I am holding you to account. You are not looking at this. And we are, and they had a regular cadence. It's like, if this number is not hitting it, why are the executives not looking? Because then you start getting into the myriad of problems. Too hard to log on, doesn't answer the questions, the data never changes, right? Each of those are addressable. Because if the dashboard looks the same every month, you're not monitoring the same. You need to change the questions. You find the things that change. So I think that's a really good strategic thing. And then from an analyst perspective, the biggest and this goes back to the simplicity thing, the biggest pitfall you can do as an excited new user of technology is to throw the kitchen sink on what you're building and show off all the skills. So I used to do this at the University of Oxford in my first year at Tableau. I was like, I am so good at Tableau, I'm going to build these super complicated, intricate, multifaceted things. I'm look how good I am at Tableau. And of course, everybody went, I'm not using that. I'm like, well, why not? And so, oh yeah, because it's not about me. It's about serving them the simplest thing possible to hit those things. So the leaders need to buy in, and you need to challenge them. It's like make it an objective, make it one of their core KPIs. Get them to buy in, because if they don't, it won't work. And then
that's good. So basically, it's dashboard around dashboard use. So
that's it's very meta. Yeah.
Good. As you know, I'm very into the big data domain, and that's kind of my core expertise. And that also immediately brings a constraint, because processing significant large volumes of data is, first of all, it's expensive. It takes time. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to kind of bring that towards the discussion around offline dashboards or batch dashboards, basically, versus the whole discussion of real-time dashboards. And I'm very frequently in a discussion where all the executives say, we need real-time analytics, information. I said, that's possible, but it's going to cost you. And then they end up going to more, let's say, daily generated dashboards because of the querying part. So I was wondering, what's your take on that discussion? Is there a point where you say, well, it is going to be more valuable to go to online and real-time information versus the more, I would say, traditional ETL kind of dashboard?
I think generally, in my experience, 95 to 99% of those use cases, when you say, why do you want real-time? The answer, ultimately, when you ask them why 5 times, they're like, because I think that's important. It's like, is it? And it turns out not to be. There's very few organizations. I mean, we've had this internally in Salesforce, right? We need real-time access. It's like, why? What are you going to do if you see the website visits going down this hour? I mean, that's not how we work, right? Oh, isn't it? But I need to see what's happening now. It's like, well, do you? Right? So there's actually, it's just, most organizations are fairly normal and traditional, and most people just don't need it. So that's largely my answer is, do they really need real time? And most of the time they don't. I mean, have you found examples where they really genuinely need real time? Traffic. Now, I mean, traffic networks. There are real time examples. I'm not saying they don't exist, but they're the minority.
Yeah.
Do you have examples?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good point. It's so difficult typically to explain, that even though we're in this fast-paced world where everyone needs the information right now, that's still not always a need. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
I'd like to move on to another technical question. Again, I'm going to go into the big data domain a bit more. There's obviously a whole lot of more unstructured data these days. So putting things into nice graphs when it's structured, tables, columns, it's relatively simple without doing anyone injustice, but that's a relatively easy problem. Becomes much more difficult if we're talking about pictures, audio files, video, images. Is there going to be this next wave of dashboarding approaches that is, for instance, going to give us insights and visualizations around unstructured data? What's your view? And is it going to be your new book?
No, the new book is about the process of building dashboards. What we didn't do, we didn't talk about how to build these things. We just showed them. So this is much more about how to. I'm going to plead some level of ignorance and say I don't know the answer to that question, because I don't spend a lot of time working with that type of unstructured data, that's outside. I don't know. You found the boundary. You found the boundary of my knowledge. That's right there.
Well, I'm actually honored to actually get at that particular level.
There is an edge. We found it.
Well, let's jump off that cliff then and dive into the deeper. You talked about the process, and I also wanted to kind of look a little bit more around the human aspect of building dashboards and visualizations and using this. How do you get people involved or excited around this? And I know that you're teaching a lot, you're evangelizing, which is kind of the core of the job, is to get people enthusiastic around that. What's the number one thing that organizations should care about?
Well, the number one thing that organizations should care about is, are they using data to inform their decisions, or are they using data or even data and even AI to make predictive suggestions, right? That's what companies should care about. When you get down to the data visualization aspect of that, I think, it's interesting. A lot of people, you show them the fundamentals of why charts work. Literally, why does the eye and the brain work so well as a cognitive system to register different lengths of bars or scatter plots? Just the science of that, right? That blew me away in 2007 when I first saw somebody do a lecture on that. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So for a certain type of person, possibly the analyst or the people who are probably working with data, absolutely mind-blowing. Another way, going slightly higher up the level, or covering more levels in an organization, is to talk about the power of data as a persuasive communication mechanism, right? So data visualization is a language. It is a means to convey an opinion or an argument. That's a quote from Kim Reese, one of the conferences we did it. But it's one of the most inspiring quotes I've ever had, because let's say you're my CEO, right? And I want to persuade you that my campaign is something you need to invest in. I can go and put a chart on a slide, and I can frame that chart using color and text and annotations and all sorts of things to lead you down the path I want to lead you, right? And that's absolutely incredible, because people think charts are just neutral. Oh, their charts are boring, straight, and neutral. It's like, that's absolute BS. Charts are linguistic things that can be used to interpret. And teaching that to leaders is like, oh, this stuff's not neutral. It's like, no, it's not neutral. It's really powerful. And if you want to use data to drive change, focus on the way you present it. And then once they see those things done well, I think that's quite inspiring. So that was the inspiration answer, right? Inspire some people by telling them how these things work, and inspire other people by showing them how easy it is to manipulate people through psychology. God, that sounds really deceptive, but it's not.
Well, I think that brings a good point, because let me move from the inspiring maybe towards the philosophical. And
love it. Let's
all over the world, we have billions of people, and they speak different languages, different cultures. We have different values. There's a whole lot of things going on in the world. But if you put a good dashboard in front of somebody that speaks a language that you don't understand, in, let's say, China, and you do that in South America, and in the United States, and in Africa, and in Australia, and everyone, we as human beings, we understand and interpret charts, visualizations uniformly, regardless of language, culture, belief systems. Why is that? And again, this is where
it's 9:45 in the morning as we record it for me. I'm loving this. This is a good depth in the morning, right? First of all, it's not actually universal. There are some cultures, for example, the way we interpret time and our movement through time. Some cultures think we move forwards in time. Some think we move backwards. Some relate time to their geography, which is very strange. There's a great book by Naomi Tversky, I don't remember her first time, about the way we perceive time. And then left to right or right to left reading does influence visualizations a little bit. Some colors in some cultures are interpreted differently. So in the Western culture, red is almost universally an alert color. In China, it can be an alert color, but it can also be a color of happiness and joy. So there are some differences, but I will agree with the general premise, right? Mostly we universally interpret things the same. The reason that is the case is we have all evolved from the same proto-humans in Africa. And what did we do when we were evolving eyesight and interpretations? We needed to spot animals as they moved through the landscape. We needed to see the different colors of particular berries or things. We needed to spot patterns on a landscape in order to survive and thrive. Those things led to cognitive aspects which enable us to see charts. So those hunters and gatherers made us into great data analysts, because color, length, size, angle are the atoms that build charts based on the skills we needed millions of years ago. which I think is awesome. It's one of the most amazing things I've come to learn over these 20 years. It's like, oh my god, everybody knows what a bar chart looks like because we used to hunt and gather. It's like incredible.
but that's I would say in the science and maybe also the art of data. If you really drill it down, it's very universal, and that's also what I personally like around it, and maybe that's indeed the philosophical art or part of it, but that makes it very, very interesting.
Art and science. You've said some of the most. It's an art and a science, and there's loads of philosophy. That's why I started the Sweet Spot newsletter, because this kind of stuff, I love it. It's great.
Well, that's good. I know we're very rapidly going through the time, and I could easily talk to you for another hour. So maybe we should do a follow-up session one of these days. But there's one question I always end with, and that's also we're moving back from the philosophical to the inspiration part a bit, because we have that most people who are watching or listening to this podcast are in the age range 20 to 30. And I always like to end, and I ask this to of all my guests, is if you are listening right now and you would like to learn, how do I become the best dashboarder, BI, analytics person in the world? What's your piece of advice that you say, this is what I would really recommend based on all my years of experience?
Practice. That's it, right? Because this is an art and a science. It is a skill that is a skill that can be learned, but it is a skill that takes practice. One of the best things about working at Tableau is that we have this enormous community of passionate users that create loads of participation projects. Makeover Monday, Back to Viz Basics, Workout Wednesday. They are projects that essentially give you a data set and say, go and build a chart and just practice, right? Just do that every week. Build a portfolio. It creates the muscle. Earlier I said, like, I don't need to refer to the books and things because it's kind of all in here, but that's because I've been doing it over 17 years, right? And so then the sort of the sidebar to that is, when you look at people's work who've been doing it for years, don't be intimidated. Go and find their first piece of work, because my first dashboard I thought was amazing, but now I look back and I'm like, God, but I've progressed. Everybody starts somewhere, and if you don't start, if you don't make that first practice step, you won't get anywhere. So practice.
Well, I think that's some amazing closing advice to everyone who's listening. Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here on Big Data Talks. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom. We really look forward to your second book, so please keep me informed, and I'm happy to have you back once it's published.
Yeah,
and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us on your morning.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful way to start the day for me. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.